October 1942 near Rangoon, Burma. The British field cook stared in disbelief at the Japanese captain standing before her. After 5 days as prisoners, she and her 4 kitchen comrades expected transfer to a distant camp, perhaps hard labor, certainly separation from their unit. Instead, the Japanese officer was pointing at their mobile field kitchen, the wheeled unit British soldiers called the tea wagon, and asking through an interpreter if they could prepare dinner, not just for themselves but for everyone, Japanese soldiers, other British prisoners and even nearby displaced Burmese civilians. "You want us to cook?" Sergeant Margaret Thomson asked, certain she had misunderstood. The concept violated everything Allied propaganda had prepared them for regarding Japanese treatment of prisoners. For 2 years, they'd heard stories of brutal captivity, starvation conditions and vindictive punishment. Yet here stood this captain, explaining matter-of-factly that her unit had outpaced their own kitchen staff. They were all hungry, and the British clearly knew how to operate their equipment. The Japanese 18th Division had captured this support unit during their rapid advance through Burma following the fall of Singapore. Among their regular prisoners, infantrymen, medics and the occasional officer, they found something unexpected. A complete Army Catering Corps detachment with 5 trained cooks, 2 fully operational field kitchens, and supplies meant to feed a British company for 10 days. Military records from October 1942 confirmed this unusual encounter. The 18th Division's operational log notes, captured British field kitchen with personnel intact. Equipment serviceable. Decision made to utilize same for immediate improvement of food situation. This practical approach to enemy resources wasn't specifically outlined in any military handbook but reflected Japanese pragmatism born of extended supply lines. The British field kitchen represented remarkable efficiency in mobile catering. Designed to feed 100 to 120 personnel from a single unit, these wheeled kitchens could prepare meals while literally on the move. Large copper kettles could produce tea, soup, or stew for an entire company. British Army specifications required hot meals served at precise intervals. Efficiency the Japanese Army's field cooking units, often reduced to rice balls prepared hours in advance, could seldom match. Sergeant Margaret Thomson, according to processing documents, had managed a tea room in Brighton before the war. Her assistant, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, daughter of Hong Kong immigrants, had trained at the Savoy before joining the service. Together with 3 other food service specialists, Corporal Ellen Murphy from Dublin, Private Beatrice Williams from Cardiff, and Private Dorothy Singh from Bombay, they had kept their unit fed through the chaotic retreat across Burma. Now, as prisoners, they faced the bizarre prospect of continuing their duties, but for their captors. The British cooks exchanged glances, weighing their options. Refusing might mean separation, standard POW camps, perhaps shipment to Japan or Manchuria. Accepting meant maintaining their unit cohesion, continuing their profession, and perhaps better treatment. According to later interviews with Thomson, it took less than a minute to decide. "Yes, ma'am," Thomson replied, straightening her posture despite exhaustion. "We can cook. What supplies do you have?" That simple exchange, documented in both Japanese records and post-war interviews, began one of the war's most unusual arrangements. Within hours, the field kitchen was steaming, British cooks were preparing ingredients, and Japanese soldiers were forming queues with their mess kits, creating a scene that contradicted everything both sides had been told about their enemies. As darkness fell over Burma that October evening, the aroma of cooking food drew Japanese and British soldiers to a shared meal that neither side had anticipated at dawn. The first hesitant tastes, the cautious appreciation, the surprised nods of approval. These moments began a culinary collaboration that would eventually challenge deeply held prejudices more effectively than any propaganda campaign. That first shared meal revealed profound differences between British and Japanese military culinary traditions. Sergeant Thomson's team prepared their standard fare: strong tea, thick vegetable soup with tinned beef, boiled potatoes, and hard biscuits softened in gravy. The Japanese soldiers approached the steaming kettles with visible skepticism. Their own army cooking typically centered on rice with pickled vegetables, miso soup and occasional fish or meat, components served separately in precise portions. "It's very brown," observed one Japanese lieutenant, examining the thick soup. The British cook nodded, explaining through halting gestures that this maximized nutrition during cold nights and utilized available ingredients efficiently. The Japanese soldiers' confusion deepened when no rice accompanied the meal. British military cooking relied on bread and potatoes as staples, not the short-grain rice that sustained Japanese forces. Japanese Army records from 1942 documented standard rations at approximately 2,800 calories daily per soldier, heavily dependent on rice supplies transported from Japan or requisitioned locally. British Army regulations specified 3,200 calories, with emphasis on preserved meats, dairy products and grain diversity. Most striking to the British cooks was the Japanese insistence on rice preparation. Within hours of establishing the arrangement, Japanese quartermaster officers delivered 50-pound bags of rice alongside pickled plums, dried seaweed and fermented soybeans. According to Dorothy Singh, whose family's Indian and British heritage made her uniquely suited to cross-cultural cooking, the Japanese officers insisted on rice being available at every meal, not as a side dish but as the foundation. They become quite distressed without proper rice, she wrote in a diary later recovered. It's not merely food to them, it's cultural identity on a plate. British Army regulations from 1942 confirm a tea ration of 5/8 ounce per person daily, enough for 6 strong cups. The Japanese soldiers, meanwhile, marveled at how British cooks utilized preserved and tinned goods. Condensed milk, corned beef, tinned vegetables and chocolate rations. These items represented a supply chain the Japanese, operating at the end of extended logistics, could barely maintain. Cultural misunderstandings abounded. British cooks prepared tea at dawn, following their traditions. Japanese soldiers expected rice and miso soup. The British scheduled the main meal at midday, the Japanese expected it in the evening. Japanese officers initially ate separately from enlisted personnel, a hierarchy that seemed familiar to the British, though the specific protocols differed significantly. By the second week, practical compromises emerged. Mess schedules posted in both languages showed how meal timing evolved. Breakfast included both tea and rice. Lunch incorporated elements from both cuisines. Dinner featured hybrid dishes that surprised everyone. Japanese supply officers provided unfamiliar ingredients: dried mushrooms, soy sauce in ceramic jugs, packets of dried fish. The British cooks experimented cautiously, combining these with their own tinned goods to create entirely new dishes. "We thought they would execute us," Thomson confided to a Japanese-speaking British prisoner after 3 weeks of cooking. "We were told they showed no mercy to captives." The Japanese captain replied through the interpreter with equal candor, "We expected you to be arrogant and refuse to work. Yet here you are, just cooks trying to feed people like our own." Military historian Dr. Kenji Yamamoto's analysis of Japanese Southern Army records confirms that by December 1942, at least 12 similar arrangements had developed across the Burma-Thailand theater, with British cooks maintaining their duties under Japanese supervision. The Japanese 18th Division's medical officer noted improved morale in units with British cooking support, attributing it to dietary variety and the psychological benefit of hot meals prepared with evident care. What began as an expedient solution to temporary conditions was evolving into something more structured. The professional respect between cooks transcended national uniforms. When a Japanese supply train delivered unfamiliar ingredients, dried squid, pickled radish, sake, British and Japanese kitchen staff huddled together, comparing techniques and trading knowledge that neither side's military had anticipated sharing. November 1942, near Moulmein, Burma. The aroma of freshly baked bread, a scent previously unimaginable to Japanese troops far from supply bases, wafted across the makeshift encampment. Inside a requisitioned Burmese monastery, Sergeant Thomson and her team had constructed 2 improvised ovens from local bricks, salvaged metal, and parts from their damaged field kitchens. The Japanese 18th Division, consolidating their position in Burma, had brought their British cooking unit with them, an arrangement no military manual had anticipated. "They asked if we could make proper bread," Thomson explained to a visiting Japanese officer. "So we built these." The ovens produced 150 loaves daily, combining British baking techniques with locally sourced flour. The crusty loaves became highly prized among Japanese troops accustomed to rice balls that grew hard and unpalatable hours after preparation. Japanese supply records from November 1942 show requests for flour increased 60% in units employing British bakers, creating new logistics challenges but improving troop satisfaction. The improvisation extended beyond bread. When Japanese quartermasters provided unfamiliar ingredients, dried bonito flakes, fermented bean paste, pickled ginger, the British cooks experimented cautiously. Sarah Chen, drawing on her Hong Kong heritage, developed particular skill bridging the culinary gap. Her Burma stew, combining British technique with Japanese ingredients, became so popular that soldiers from neighboring units came to trade cigarettes and sake for an extra serving. "We're feeding 250 people 3 meals daily from kitchens designed for 120, recorded Japanese Lieutenant Yuki Nakamura in her November field report. The British cooks worked 12-hour days without complaint. Their adaptability exceeds our expectations. This productivity didn't go unnoticed at higher levels. By December, Japanese Southern Army headquarters had issued a memorandum: British POW cooks may be retained at unit level where security allows and performance merits. The cooking operation expanded beyond military personnel. In villages across the occupied territory, British field kitchens, now marked with Japanese insignia but still operated by their original crews, provided hot meals to displaced civilians. Near Pegu, Thomson's team fed 90 Burmese civilians daily alongside their Japanese and British military diners. Military government records document this unusual arrangement: British POW catering unit providing daily meals to civilian population under Japanese supervision, reducing demand on civil affairs food supplies. Cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Japanese cooks learned British techniques for bread making and utilizing preserved goods. British cooks adopted Japanese methods for rice preparation, pickle making, and soup bases using dried ingredients. The resulting hybrid cuisine created something entirely new, a pragmatic wartime fusion. Japanese soldiers taught their British counterparts to prepare onigiri rice balls with various fillings. British cooks showed the Japanese how to make Yorkshire pudding that could stretch limited eggs and milk into filling portions. The numbers tell the story of expanding operations. Japanese quartermaster records from December 1942 show one British POW kitchen team feeding an average of 240 people daily using 20% less fuel than equivalent Japanese field cooking units, though requiring different ingredient types. By January 1943, 9 documented British cooking teams operated under Japanese supervision across Burma, serving approximately 2,800 meals daily to Japanese troops, other POWs, and civilians. Lieutenant Sarah Chen received permission to maintain a herb garden near the encampment, growing coriander, mint, and chili peppers to supplement military rations. Her notebook, preserved in Imperial War Museum archives, meticulously records yields: 64 pounds of greens, 89 pounds of root vegetables, 23 pounds of herbs harvested before monsoon season. These fresh ingredients transformed standard military fare into something approaching pre-war civilian meals. As the rainy season approached, these cooking arrangements became increasingly formalized. Japanese officers issued handwritten documents to their British cooks, identifying them as essential personnel. These papers, several of which survive in archives, protected the cooks from transfer to harsher labor camps. What had begun as emergency improvisation was evolving into something more permanent, a recognition that former enemies could provide essential services under the right conditions, and that shared meals could create unexpected bonds even amid the brutality of war.